Welcome to the Mystery College Podcast. Today we're doing an interview with Peter Russell. Welcome to the show.
Nice to be with you, Jake.
It's great to be with you. So, Peter, your work often integrates science and spiritual practices. So, how do you see mindfulness bridging the gap between these two worlds?
Yes, I think we need to sort of enlarge our meaning of science a little from just beyond, what fits within the physical paradigm of reality being space-time, matter, energy, which is, being gradually dissolved in science anyway. I see meditation. I approach it as in a scientific way. I mean, the way science works is you come up with an idea, a hypothesis, and you test it out, and you draw conclusions, and then you share that result with others to see if they agree. And I think meditation of many sorts fits into that. So, we have an idea that if I practice a certain mindfulness practice, then I will find my mind quietens down. We do it. And if we find our mind quietens down and other people feel the same, then we have a sort of a consensus agreement, which is what science is about. And so in that very simple way, we are approaching science, we're approaching meditation in a scientific way. What would be unscientific would be just to take something on faith. Somebody says, you've got to do this practice of meditation, and you do it without actually questioning, is it really working? So I think that's the spirit of science, is a healthy skepticism. Like, okay, let's see. Let's not take it on faith. Let's see what works. So that's one approach. And of course, at the same time, science can be, the more material sciences can be looking at the brain, what's happening in the brain, which tends to corroborate some of the claims of mindfulness. And also it's what we get from meditation practice is an understanding, not just how meditation works, but an understanding of our own minds, how we work, how we get caught up in things, certain thoughts or whatever it is, and feelings. So it's like one's own personal scientific exploration of one's own mind. So we could look at it from that point of view as well.
From that point of view as well. And you've often talked about the importance of letting go and achieving mindfulness. Would you care to share like a personal experience where letting go or achieving mindfulness has significantly impacted your practice or your sense of well-being?
Oh, yes. Well, I think, first of all, how I approach letting go is not trying to get rid of something, but actually doing the opposite. Well, we have something we want to let go of. We think I've got to get rid of that experience, but it's more not having it trouble us anymore. And so I reframe letting go as not like pushing something out to the boundaries of our awareness where it won't bother us, which is what we normally do. I've got to let go of this anger. I won't think about it, etc. It doesn't work. It's still there in the background, still controlling us. So I reframe letting go as letting in and letting be. And so first of all, we have to let the experience in. And so if it were anger, and I'll come back to the meditation in a moment, if it were anger, let in what's actually happening. What am I feeling in my body? Where is it? Discover what's going on, almost with a sort of curiosity. And, at the same time, what am I telling myself? And let that in. And then not trying to change it, just letting it be. And there's something that's, I call it sort of metabolism of the human being, that when we let things into our awareness, somehow they begin to soften and dissolve. Experience I had, which was quite profound in meditation and mindfulness practice one day, was I was sitting in meditation, but I was realizing, there was a stiffness in my shoulder. It was on my left shoulder. I know exactly where it was, like a little discomfort there. And I was trying to get rid of it by adjusting my position and doing this, and it wouldn't go away. And so I just did this practice of just like, okay, let me just really feel what's there. And so I just opened my awareness to the discomfort in my shoulder. And of course, when you do that, initially it seems to get worse, because if you're pushing it back beforehand, when you open up to it, it tends to get a bit worse or feel stronger. And then what I noticed, as I just sat, just being with how that felt in my shoulder, I noticed muscles down at the bottom of my back softening and relaxing. And it's like, wow. And then as they softened and relaxed, my shoulder moved and relaxed. And it's like my body knew exactly what needed to happen. And it was nothing to do with the shoulder. It was to do with, muscles in my pelvis and my lower back. And so by just being with it, I could open to the wisdom of the body to show me what was needed. But the whole thing was just like letting it in and letting it be, not trying to get rid of it. My mind was trying to get rid of it, thinking all the ways I could get rid of it. But just by letting it in and letting it be, my body would say, okay, I know what you need. I know what you need. Just to relax this. Yeah.
Beautiful. And that it also makes me wonder too, because like that practice of mindfulness being so powerful and letting be and letting go. And in your work, in the scope of your work, you've often highlighted the interface between consciousness and the physical world. So how do you perceive the evolution of consciousness in the context of scientific discoveries?
Oh, that's a huge area. Yes. I've written books on that. Firstly, I don't even like the word consciousness because it's a noun. When we add NESS to a word like, soft is a description, softness is the noun, which we use in speech to describe it. But softness doesn't exist, but the feeling of soft does exist. So the same way with consciousness, I think we end up on a misguided path when we make it a noun, because we start making it a thing to look for, a thing to be experienced. Whereas the truth is, we all are conscious. We know what it means to be conscious. It's this thing of, here I am experiencing the world. And so being conscious is being conscious of all the different things that go on in our mind, in our experience, in our senses. If you make consciousness a thing, you're looking for something in your experience as opposed to just noticing, here I am and experiencing being. So we cannot objectify consciousness, but it's a mistake that I see being made time and time again, particularly in the scientific community, where they're looking, how can we explain consciousness? How can we understand it? Where's it come from? My view is it's always there. It's always there. It's just that we're always experiencing. I mean, even in deep sleep, we know, there's some very subtle experiences, not very conscious, but the stuff going on. So it's that very basic background. And at the moment, science has no way of accounting for that. It's rare because science may be able to account for a lot of what goes on, from atoms to biology to out in the universe to many things. And most of science takes place in the mind. Our thinking about things, our hypothesizing, our drawing theories, making theories, drawing, that's all mental work. I mean, some of it is physical, doing experiments out there in the world, but most of it takes place in the mind. And yet there's nothing in modern science which would suggest we would ever be conscious, we would have a mind. And science prides itself on its predictive behavior. Any model or theory in science should be something that there should be a prediction from it you can test. It does not predict. We will be aware or be conscious. And so that suggests to me there's something fundamentally amiss with the current scientific worldview, just because it doesn't predict the one thing we all know for sure, that we are an aware being. It doesn't predict that. And so the way science is leaning these days is, and I say it's leaning because gradually more and more sort of scientists, philosophers are leaning in this direction. It's only a small number, but it's where things are going, is to say that consciousness is not created by the brain. Our experiences may be. If I experience, the tree outside my window, that experience I know is, like I can analyze what's happening in the brain, and the experience of a tree arises in my mind. But so the brain, I would say, I'd be happy to accept the brain is responsible for everything that appears in consciousness. But people then confuse that with the brain is therefore responsible for consciousness in the first place. And where, I say, this growing number of thinkers are going is to say, hang on, no, maybe the consciousness, being conscious is a part of life. It's an intrinsic part of life, which is not just in human beings, it's in all creatures to different degrees. I mean, the consciousness of a fish may be much lower than ours, but it's there to some degree everywhere. And so they're coming around to this view, which is technically it's called panpsychism, which literally means all psyche, everything has mind. Mind is everywhere, which is, I think, it's the way that it's the way the paradigm needs to go, because then we're not caught up with how do we explain how consciousness arises, which no one's done. We accept it's right there, and then what we have to explain is how does this tree out there produce this experience in the mind? But that's a whole different problem. That's what the philosopher David Chalmers, he called that the easy problem. The easy problem of consciousness is explaining how the light from the tree is processed by the brain and gives rise to this experience. The hard problem is, why is there consciousness in the first place? But I say that's the way things are going. That's the evolution that's happening in the scientific thinking.
Yeah, that's a huge area for growth and evolution. And the term panpsychism is quite intriguing. The idea that our universe interfaces or projects like light or and that things have varying degrees of consciousness, whether it's anything that is alive or conscious.
Yeah.
Does that extend to and your understanding to things that we perceive as having life, such as like plants, animals, or does that extend to things in so much as far as rocks or things that may not even be perceptible by the human eye?
Right. I think you have to extend it to everything in theory, because if you don't, then somewhere you're drawing a line. I mean, supposing you drew the line between animals and plants, you can say, well, animals have nervous systems. Even a simple worm, very simple worm, has a nervous system. Plants don't have nervous systems as we think of them. So then you have to explain, what is it about a worm having a nervous system that allows it to be conscious, whereas a tree isn't or plant isn't? So I think you have to say it's there in everything. But, what we're beginning to understand about plants is they do process a lot of information, but not through the nerves that we think of, but through a lot of chemical processing that goes on. And they are sensitive. So I think it would be wrong to say there is no internal world. It's probably a lot simpler than ours, much, much simpler, and maybe nothing like ours, because ours comes from physical senses and nervous system. And so there's nowhere I think you can actually draw a line. So if you say, the question people always ask, does that mean rocks are conscious? It doesn't mean they are conscious in the way that we know rocks. I mean, a rock, its structure is is a crystalline structure, which is far, far simpler than the most simple of bacteria. So we could say, a bacterium probably has some very, very faint glimmer of equivalent, probably as taste, because what rubs up against its skin, the chemicals, it would be 1/1000th of what we know, or something, put numbers on it. A rock, crystalline structure like a rock, would be far, far less than that. A bacterium is far more complex than a rock. So it's to do with the complexity of the information flow that determines what appears in consciousness. So a rock is what people call proto-consciousness. Sometimes it's not consciousness as we know it, but it's the forerunner of consciousness. It's in that realm of something subjective, but probably no actual experience going on as we know it.
And I appreciate the distinguishment, and that that in delineating between one form of consciousness or other, then it's missing something. So that bridges to my question about, when we're discussing the nature of consciousness. You've also explored themes of unity and interconnectedness in your body of work. So, do you mind elaborating on how these concepts are central to your understanding of human consciousness?
Yes. Well, I'm particularly interested in the field that today is known as non-duality,
Mm.
which is the Indian teaching. It's a literal translation of the Indian teaching of Advaita, which I came across 50 years ago when I first started exploring this subject. It wasn't called non-duality then, it was just called Advaita. Advaita literally means ad means not. Vita means two, not dual. I mean, you can see it's DVAI, it's similar to DUA. The roots are very similar. A lot of our words, you can find going back to Sanskrit. And it doesn't mean, it's often translated as, oh, that means everything is one. It doesn't mean that. It means not just duality. And the analogy, one of the first ever real descriptors that was written down, it was in the Upanishads. That's where it first starts appearing. And in one of them, this teacher, well, he sent his son off to school, and his son's come back from school. Like, he's been away for 5 years or whatever, and he's learned everything that they could learn then, which probably was about astrology and mathematics and who knows what, and language. I'm sure they learned a lot about Sanskrit, and religious rites and all that stuff, whatever they taught in school. And he said to his son, but did they teach you about that by which all this knowledge is known? Pointing, of course, to consciously. Did they teach you about that by which all this knowledge is known? And he said, no. So the father starts this whole series of analogies. And the one that I like, he says, you see these two pots made of clay. These are two clay pots. They are different. This pot is not that pot. There is difference. That is duality. The two pots are different. And they're both made of clay. So they share what they're made of. And so, but then he points out, and this is the important point, but the clay is not changed by becoming this pot or that pot. The clay remains unchanged, although it takes on different forms. And what he's pointing to is what basically this version of non-duality says is, all these, whatever I'm experiencing appears in consciousness. It appears in consciousness, but consciousness itself is not changed. The being aware, this faculty of being aware, just here I am, being aware, that is never changed. That's the same. And I would suggest it's the same for you as it is for me. When you stop and just notice, here I am, an aware being, you're having the same connection with yourself as I am and anybody else is. What appears, the forms that appear, or not even forms, the activities that consciousness takes on are very, very different. So there is duality. What I experience is different from you. There's duality, there's diversity, there's difference. And there is an underlying unity which never changes. And that's what they're pointing to. And that's what we miss out on in the world. Almost every society, culture, focuses on the duality, what we need to do to control the world, make it be the way we want, whatever. We're so busy doing that or thinking, whatever it is, we don't notice, here I am, this conscious being here, always here. We don't notice it because our attention is out there on the outside. And so in that way, it's a universal teaching, just expressed in slightly different ways in different cultures.
Yeah, that it's a universal teaching because that same fabric of consciousness exists and permeates all human beings, or that same faculty, and the fact that many times we're looking outside as opposed to looking in. So bridging that to your explorations into meditation and mindfulness, like some meditation and mindfulness practices are really critical or crucial in providing the space for us to realizing our true nature, kind of like these clay pots. So clay pots, like the clay is same no matter what it's shaped into.
Yeah.
So what insights have you gathered on how these practices alter our perception of consciousness that you've gathered through, Advaita, classical Advaita, and other practices?
Yeah. And my own practice, I started off actually with TM, transcendental meditation, and that comes out of the Advaita tradition, although it doesn't use that language, it comes out of that tradition. And then I explored mindfulness and I now have my own practice, which is sort of derived from a mixture of the two of them. Um, See, the basic thing, it was common to both practice and many other practices, is the basic instruction is when you notice you've got caught up in a thought, don't follow the thought any longer. And it may be coming back to the breath, coming back to a mantra, coming back to feelings, but you're coming back to an experience in the present moment. Our thoughts are always taking us out into the past or the future. That's where thoughts go. You know, what happened yesterday? Did I do that right? What's going to happen tomorrow? I'm excited about that, am I? Whatever it is, we're always thinking about, our thoughts take us out of the present. Even if we have a thought about the present, like, oh, this is nice, it immediately goes to, oh, I must do this again, or whatever. So our thoughts take us out of the present. So what we're doing in meditation is learning the skill of stepping back from the thoughts and coming back to the present moment. But then what can happen in mindfulness is we can be so, I like to say that, so busy meditating, we don't notice where the meditation is taking us. So we can practice mindfulness, and we notice, oh yes, the mind's become quiet, my body's become relaxed. Yes, yeah, you know, and then coming back. But we miss two things. We miss, first of all, how it feels. You know, and that, to savor the experience, is like, oh, this is nice. I'm just feeling, it feels like I'm being myself. It feels good. And so I always teach, you know, not only let the mind quieten down, but savor how it feels, almost soak in that feeling, because that encourages us to actually go deeper. It's like, oh, yes, this is nice. Rather than just being some practice we're doing, we're actually beginning to savor and enjoy the benefits of it. So that's really important. And then coming back to the second thing, which is noticing, here I am. Noticing this sense of I am that's always there. Not I am Peter Russell, blah, 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 but the I am of that I that's been here all my life, even though lots of my life has changed, things I identify with have changed, but that sense of I am. So then, and I call this mindfulness of being, to take mindfulness a step further and just be mindful of our own being, our own beingness, that sense of I am that's there, whatever the experience. And it's there in thoughts, but our attention is so taken up with the thought, we don't notice it. So that's why we need to step out of our thoughts and gradually step out of our experiences to say, and here I am, and it's nice. It's nice. It's contentment. It feels okay. And the more we notice that it feels okay just to sit back in this sense of being, the more that becomes reinforcement to continue that practice. So I take it just that step further, so that we're beginning to come back and noticing this sense of I am, which, as I say, is there. I think it's the same for every one of us, that sense of I.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that also makes me wonder too about how if more people came into this sense of I, or they had this sense of awareness, or they came into a practice where they allowed themselves to marinate or soak into a blissful state that's reflecting their own consciousness or reflecting in their practice, how that would affect the crisis of consciousness that we're fundamentally facing.
Yeah.
One of the things you talk about is a global crisis that we're facing around the world being a crisis of consciousness, which I think is brilliant and right on the mark. So I'd love to hear about how like a shift in collective consciousness could contribute to solving global issues. What's the path forward?
Yeah. I say it's a crisis of consciousness because if you look at all that's going wrong, or most of what's going wrong in the world, you know, environmentally, socially, internationally, whatever, personally, it all comes back in one way or another to our mode of consciousness. And a lot of it comes back to whether it's greed, love of power, looking after ourselves at the expense of others. It comes back to our mode of consciousness. And it comes back to our thinking, so much of it, what we think we need, basically what we think we need in order to be happy. That's the fundamental mindset that runs our culture. If I had this, I'd be happy. If I get rid of this, I'll be happy. So it's all about how do we change the world in order to be happy. And yet, what I've been pointing out in meditation, if we stop the thinking, if we stop the worrying about how to be happy, it's nice. And it's like, I sometimes think of this as sort of the sad joke about humanity. We're so busy working out how to be at peace in the future, we miss the fact we can just be at peace in the present moment. And I see that's what's driving the world crazy. So as we get more in touch with our own sense of being, I think several things happen. First of all, a lot of our fear begins to dissolve. A lot of our fear is just created in our minds. I think it was Mark Twain who said, "My life has been full of disasters, most of which never happened." It's fear. We fear this. What's somebody going to think of me? What if I lose this? What if the stock market crashes? What if this happens? What if? Fear leads us to do a lot of these crazy, unnecessary, and, let's put it kindly, non-helpful things. And many teachings say, love is letting go of fear. When we let go of the fear, which we are doing in meditation, we become more loving. The way I phrase it is, when I'm deep in meditation, there's a sense of lovingness. Not that I love this or love that, but it's just a feeling in the heart of just very simple, just lovingness that's there. And so, that the first question becomes, or the first issue or answer is, what would the world be like if everybody was coming from a place of love rather than fear? Or put it more realistically, if they're coming much more from love and much less from fear, I think society would develop in a very, very different way. And then secondly, and it's sort of related, is this thing I've been talking about, when we realize fundamentally, deep down, we're all the same. And that deep down, we all want the same thing. On the surface, we all want many, many different things, and often they're in conflict with each other. But deep down, what we want is to basically be happy, to feel okay, to be content. We don't want to suffer. We don't want to be judged or attacked. We want to feel okay, the simplest way to put it. And what happens is, if we're caught up in trying to change the world, it's like, so I'm in some sort of relationship with you and you say something to me that's meant completely innocently, but because of my stuff, we'll call it, my whatever it is, my background, I misinterpret that as some form of attack. And if I'm not really aware, which a lot of the time I'm not, I'll respond to your perceived attack with some other much more direct attack. It might be just change in body language or tone, or how dare you say that, or whatever it is. Now I'm actually attacking you deliberately, and you respond in the same way, and we get into this cycle of mutual attack. And it can be very sort of hidden, it's like, appears okay on the surface, but digging, well, you would say that sort of thing. We're digging the knife in little bits. And that's why so many relationships end up on sort of rocky foundations, because what we want is, we don't want to be attacked. None of us want to be attacked, and yet we're doing it. And this is like the crazy thinking. It's like, I'm going to hurt you a little bit, because then you'll realize the error of your ways and be nice to me. And when you're doing the same thing, when two people are doing that, it gets nowhere. And so this leads into what's often called the golden rule. Again, it appears in every tradition, which is basically treat others as you would like to be treated. And so I call this the principle of kindness. And so in any interaction, I hold my intention that through this interaction, you will not feel attacked. You will not be made to suffer. You will feel appreciated, cared for, respected. And so when we do this, and I find, when I do this in a close personal relationship, when two people hold that intention, that their intention is not to hurt. Sometimes it happens, but their intention is not to attack. And you gradually start filtering out those little attack statements or behaviors. a whole different form of connection and love begins to arise in the relationship. So I think that again is something that would change society if we all came from that attitude of how can I, we have difficult things to share sometimes. It's not like, oh, that's difficult, I'm not going to do it. No, we have difficult things to share, but like, okay, let me think, how can I share this in a way the other person's going to feel okay? Maybe like, I really value our relationship, but I'm finding there's something that actually niggles me a bit and gets in the way of me actually being, fully there with you. And I just like to share it. If you press on something with that sort of statement, the other person's going to be, okay, I'm feeling respected, rather than just, you did that and I get annoyed at that. You annoy me. So just simple personal relationships, things like they're going to change the world.
Mm.
And also, of course, the less we're coming out of the ego mind, the more we can make decisions which are more appropriate to the situation at hand, whether it's on a larger scale, environmentally, politically, socially, whatever. The less we're caught up in the ego mode of functioning, the more we can actually respond to the situation in a much cleaner and creative way.
Absolutely. And and with that, you've also proposed that like love is an essential quality of consciousness and the consciousness we're developing towards growing for society. So, but based on your extensive research and maybe perhaps even your personal journey, how do you envision the future of human consciousness evolving, particularly? And what steps? Do you have any projections or thoughts on that process?
I always find it difficult to make projections because when I've done it in the past, I've been wrong or vaguely or just naive in some ways. It's always difficult. Firstly, I mean, just it's a technical point, but consciousness itself doesn't evolve. Consciousness is just this thing that's just there. It doesn't change. It doesn't evolve. The clay doesn't evolve. The clay is clay. It's there, and so in that way, being conscious doesn't evolve. When we're talking about that, what we really mean is values, what our thinking, all the things that go on in the mind. How does that change? And basically, I think, it's what I've been saying. It's like when that's less controlled by the ego, we're just going to be acting much more appropriately. But there was something else in your question you were getting at.
Yeah, I think well, I think in relation to also love as well, like
Oh yeah,
love.
yeah, yes. And I see this two sort of fundamental qualities of our true nature, called our true nature. One is our true nature is at peace. It's the thinking that takes us out of being at peace, the thinking that worries about this or that or gets excited. Our thinking takes us away from the peace. And so our true nature, it's almost like the true nature of our mental experience is being at peace. And yet, and then we have the heart. And the true nature of the heart is lovingness. And again, when we get caught up in our thoughts, as soon as we start judging another person or judging a situation, we're out of love. We're out of love. And so the more we can just quieten the mind, the more that lovingness can shine through. So it's not so much that people say, how can I love more? I would reframe that. It's how can I remove the veils, the love that's already there? And the same thing with peace. It's not how do I find peace of mind? The peace of mind is there. How do I remove the veils to the peace that's already there?
Removing those veils, that's very powerful because it's ever present, always there, as you shared.
And that's why, I mean, in a way, there's nowhere to get to. We're so busy trying to get somewhere that we think we have to apply that to our own journey of awakening, but there's actually nowhere to get to. Right here, when we fully open up to being right here, This is what we want, but we think there's somewhere to get to. So if there's nowhere to get to, and in a way, there's nothing to do it. We just, it's more about just learning how to be. And that's why, coming back to meditation, I think, the second value of meditation is not just sitting on the cushion and allowing the mind to become quiet, etc. But we learn in meditation how that skill of catching our thoughts, not following the thought, letting it go, and coming back to being here. And so a second value of meditation is we can take this out into life. Like we're training on the cushion for something we then take into life. So that when I'm, with someone else or just driving or something, and I notice my mind going off on one of its silly escapades, I can just hang on, just not going to follow that. Not that I'm going to suddenly sit down and go into a deep meditation, but I'm just learning the skill of, okay, I won't follow that. I won't follow that thought. So it's like we're practicing on the cushion so that we can actually take that out and practice it in the world.
Taking it, like we practice on the cushion, we cultivate that, and then we bring that to the world.
We bring that skill to the world that we're learning on the cushion. Yes,
absolutely. And one thing that also that's been brought to my attention is your work that touches upon using some technological augmentation of consciousness, or at least how the consciousness interacts with new technologies. So where do you see some potential benefits and perhaps pitfalls in merging technology with human consciousness?
Right. What are you thinking of AI and things, or something else when you say technology?
I think with kind of with newer tools, like both in the spiritual realm, but also in things like artificial intelligence or the sciences.
Yeah. I'm not sure how AI itself will, indirectly, it can do a lot. Just as, when the internet came along, that's done a huge thing for consciousness, not directly, but just, the fact now you can find thousands and thousands of videos of different teachers, different meditations, books everywhere. That's all available, which then allows us to take advantage of that in our own awakening journey. So I think certainly AI will do that. It will just make it more available. Already, I have my own chatbot now, in which I've uploaded all my works, my writings, all the recordings I have of videos, essays I've done, 171 files there. And people can go and ask me questions. And it's like, it comes up with better answers than I would have thought of. And so that again is the answers it comes up with. I read these sometimes and think, wow, I wouldn't have said that's wonderful. And so in a way, it's augmenting my work and presenting it to people, and stuff that, I couldn't answer all these questions, don't have the time, but people are getting their questions answered. So that's an indirect way, in which, just one little tiny indirect way in which I think AI can augment the process of awakening. And there'll be many, many others. The whole question of, is AI conscious and those things, speculation, I think maybe left alone. But then other scientific means, there's things have been around for a long time, like biofeedback, those sorts of things, where you're basically, training the brain. Very early simple stuff was neurofeedback, where you got information about what was happening in the brain, and you can begin to work, okay, if I put my attention here, then I notice the brain becomes quieter. Put my attention there, it gets excited. So maybe I can practice. We can learn practices, if you like, to quieten the brain down or do different things through feedback. So things like that, I think, can certainly help us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate that example of the AI chatbot that you created, and that's something that maybe some folks can interface with or in time. So another thing that you explore extensively is this theme of forgiveness, like your book, Forgiving Humanity.
Yeah.
So how does the mindfulness practice contribute in the process of forgiveness, both for oneself and on a global scale?
Yeah. I think mindfulness, I think we begin to see things more clearly. I would say we're less caught up in the delusion of the thinking mind. We see things more clearly. And the essence of forgiveness, in fact, the word in the Greek that's translated as forgiveness is aphesis, which means to physically let go, to release your grip on something. And so I see forgiveness as releasing the grip that the mind has on something. And that's usually about some judgment or other. So you do something that I don't approve of, and I start judging you as being this stupid son of a bitch, whatever it is. That's my judgment. Forgiveness is recognizing two things. One, who knows what goes on inside your mind? Who knows what you're intending? Who knows how well you slept last night? Did you have too many cups of coffee this morning? Who knows? If I were to put myself fully in your shoes with all your background and life experience and everything and how you were feeling at that moment, I'd have probably done exactly the same. So part of forgiveness is putting yourself in the other person's shoes fully, like walking a mile in your moccasins, that statement. If I can do that fully, then the judgment goes, the judgment dissolves. It's like, okay, here's another human being winding fending their way through life. The other side of forgiveness is realizing we don't do it so much for the other person. It isn't, I mean, the common idea of forgiveness is, okay, you did wrong. We know you did wrong, but I'm not going to punish you this time. It's not about that. It's say, I understand how you came to do that. It's that forgiveness. And when I let go of my judgment, I feel better. If I'm judging you, there's going to be a tension here. I'm going to be having these strange thoughts about you, whatever it is. I'm not happy. I'm not content. When I forgive you in that sense of letting go of my judgment, I am allowing myself to come back closer to my own being, to that sense of peace. So in forgiving you, I bring peace to myself. That, I think, is one of the most fundamental things about forgiveness, doing that.
Bringing peace to oneself.
Yeah.
And I wanted to tie in a lot of what we've spoken on today and touched on consciousness, panpsychism, all these tools, and kind of bring it back to climate change and some of the environmental concerns that you share about. And so I'm wondering how mindfulness can help foster a deeper connection with Earth, help promote sustainable living, and help bring people to more appreciation, and being perhaps more proactive with climate change.
Yeah. I mean, mindfulness as a practice isn't concerned with the content of our thinking. It's about the opposite. It's about stepping back from the content of our thinking and just being more present, which allows us to think more clearly, be more creative, etc. So the mindfulness doesn't directly affect those things, but it allows us, to be more at peace in ourselves. We're not so caught up in the ego, so we can begin to see what I can do that's really going to help the world. And we can't do everything. We can't, but we each have, as I put it, a sphere of influence. We have our own personal sphere of influence, whether it's in our family, our society, our work. I mean, you and I, because we share our ideas more widely, our zone of influence is wider. But I don't have, within my zone of influence, the president of the country is not within my direct zone of influence. So although I might love to suggest certain things that he, or in other countries she, should do or could do, not to waste time working out what I would say if I were ever in the room with them alone. That's just a waste of our time and energy. But there's a lot we can do within our sphere of influence. And so it's looking at that. And that's much more constructive, whether it's in terms of climate change, the way we live our own lives, how frugal we are, what we do with our waste, how much energy we consume, all of those things are all within our own sphere of influence. And other areas too. So I think that's the important thing. And then we can begin to think more clearly, and coming from a place of greater inner equanimity. We're not being tossed around by events the whole time. We can come back to ourselves. Here I am. These are my values. This is what I think is important. This is what I can do. And let me go out and do this in my life. So I see that's how mindfulness plays a role, a very, very important role. Not a direct role in itself, but it's putting us in a position where we can be a much more useful, constructive, positive influence in the world.
Yeah, and I appreciate that mindfulness, while it's indirectly affecting these things, but like you said, it puts us in the position where we can start thinking within our own sphere of influence or our own locus of control, and be able to better identify and not put energy into things that aren't within our locus of control, right? And I may be able to speak to, the president or this or that at this time, but what I can do is, I've got friends, family, neighbors, and so on.
Yeah.
And so if there's if there's a few key elements that you wanted people to take away from the body of your work across academic domains, across the consciousness, across climate, across the practice of meditation, what are some key elements or practices or calls to actions you'd wish the world at large would be called to or to enact?
Well, one we've touched upon, kindness. That to me is really important in society, kindness. Secondly, Gregory Bateson came up with the idea of an ecology of mind, the way I use the phrase, an ecology of mind is like looking at my own mind. Where do I get caught up? Where do I get stuck on things? And beginning to clean out one's own stuff so that I can be much cleaner in my interaction with self and the world. So just coming to understand oneself, and mindfulness definitely plays a role there. I mean, when you're sitting in meditation and you notice how a certain thought grabs you again and again, and then you start noticing what's behind that thought and things, that's beginning to see what's happening in the mind, bring awareness, and we begin to clear ourselves of some of these things that control us in these ways. So I think that's really important, getting to understand ourselves, how we operate. So your question again, because I know it triggered something else. Or just expand on it, or whatever. You've gone silent. I can't hear you.
Oh,
yeah.
Amen. Like across the body and span of your work, from climate change to academics to the study of consciousness and the Vedanta mindfulness and non-duality tradition, what are some key takeaways or actions you'd wish for the population at large to take on or implement, like some key takeaways?
Well, also, I mean, something else we've been touching on throughout is the real nature of consciousness, of just realizing our true nature is being conscious, and our true nature is one of peace and lovingness. That is who we really are. And I think the more we understand that, the more we can begin to see what gets in the way of that coming through in our lives. So I think that's fundamental. And most of us, we don't know that. We don't recognize that. We don't even think about what does it mean to be conscious. So I think that, that's what comes out of the scientific work now. It comes out of Advaita. It's there in basically all spiritual traditions. It's that recognizing, who am I? Who am I? Probing that question. And not as a question of, you ask most people, who am I? If you sit someone down and say, who are you? Well, I'm Peter Russell, I'm male, I'm British, although I'm also American, and I think this and I think that, and I have these qualities. And, you can go on for hours listing. It's not about who am I as an individual person. It's more, I refer to it as, what am I? What is I? Or rather, what do I mean by I? When I say I am Peter Russell, what do I mean by I in that statement? I am this name. But what is the I that identifies with the name? So that is a fundamental question, which if we all explored that, I think the world would be in different places. What do I mean by I? And that's what, and I can't tell you, because it's something that everybody discovers for themselves. It's an inner knowingness. There's no answer to it, but it's a doorway into a recognition of one's own beingness. So, I mean, that comes out, it comes out of the science, it comes out of the spiritual teachings, and really freeing personally. It frees us up personally. As we're talking about, when in meditation, you step back and you become quiet, and then just to say, and what is this I that is experiencing this moment? What is experiencing this moment right now? And just to hold that question, what is experiencing this moment right now? And there's no answer except there's a recognition that comes.
No answer, but the recognition that comes.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And is there any last comments or thoughts or wishes you would like to share with viewers?
Yeah, I'll think of them when we finish in 5 minutes' time. Nothing comes to mind immediately. No. Except I'd be enough people to go to my website. That's where you can find Peter Botten things, which is just peterrussell.com. You can find my chat button, loads of videos and books and things.
Beautiful, beautiful. So people can check out your website at peterrussell.com.
Yeah.
And I'll have a link in the description and on the podcast as well. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today, Peter. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Yeah, thank you. Really enjoyed it. We touched a lot of good stuff.